We're going to get our first pilot manager, Mariah, present about the pilot in Vlissingen in the Netherlands. So over to you, Mariah. I think it's you get a lot of support. So it's all good.
I just wanted to tell you something about the pilot site first before going into the lessons learned. Vlissingen is a coastal city right on the North Sea in the red square you see over there. It's also in the estuary of the Scheldt River, which makes it a very difficult location because we have both a great influence from the Scheldt River delta and the North Sea region. We have several different types of coast within our city. The first one is what we call the island and the area around the train station. There's also a canal coming into the Scheldt River, or about the point where the Scheldt River hits the North Sea. So that's a very interesting area with a green dike to protect the coast. And then there's also an area with a fortified wall with an old windmill, which is a kind of a stony barrier with grass on it. Then there's the city beach with the boulevard and hard defenses and a sandy beach. And then we have another sandy beach area, but with a more natural coastal protection by dunes, and also a part where a dike has been covered with a dune to make it more natural. Our pilot site is right in the middle of the green star in the more stony area. You can see on the kind of yellow-orange area, that is our pilot area, but with our pilot, we are protecting a much larger area behind, which you see in the yellow between the yellow dotted line. So our pilot site is actually quite small, but we're protecting a very large area. To give more context to the area and the pilot, we have the boulevard. And behind the boulevard, there is a green area that you see in the top left photo, which we use as a retention area for our pilot. At the moment, it's a green and blue area, but not accessible. And we want to guide stormwater there and make the green area more accessible to the audience. There's also part of the pilot area is a fortified wall that you see on the top right area, and on the bottom right there's also an overview photo of the area. And this is another overview photo of the area that we use. And if you're wondering, the building right in the middle, the kind of roundish building, is a cinema and a theater, which is a very big impact on the picture, at least. What we try to do is, with our pilot, is allowing seawater into the city during extreme storms, using the natural heights in the area, and guiding the seawater towards the retention area. We thought doing a regular seawall defense, like we always do, has a very big impact to our town. It would mean that we would probably have to demolish a lot of buildings and then heighten the dikes and then build new ones. But we thought, well, if we do this for a storm once in 10,000 years, that it would be a huge impact. So what if we can delay the moment of doing that by accepting seawater into our city and guiding it to an area where it can't do any harm. So there's only few houses that will be impacted by this method, and we're protecting a very large number of buildings. And what we did was we worked with the TU Delft, who's also a partner in SARCC, and they did a lot of modeling and calculations for us of how much water we can retain in the retention area and what the impact would be for the environment. And we worked basically from we started in the top left with this general idea, and then we started sketching how could we do it, because we basically used the street as a river to guide the seawater. So what we wanted to do, the river is on a slope, and what we wanted to do is to kind of slow down the water and create a flow of a river. So what we did is use the parking areas on the sides of the street and the borders of the street to kind of make the water flow like a river, like a bend, and it's the kind of idea that you see on the bottom left picture. And then we turned that into a design which is on the bottom right. And after we had the design, we created this image. This is basically what the idea would be looking like during a storm. Seawater coming in, going down the street that you see in the middle of the photo, or the picture. And then we started implementing it. It was from a very gray street with only pavement and cars. We're turning it into a greeny area where we use, we've added a lot of trees and bushes, and an area where we can guide the water to, and to get it to the retention area as well. So that is the kind of thing that you see on the picture. Basically the bottom left picture, you can see there's holes in the sides of the street where the water can get into the green area and infiltrate there and be guided down to the bottom. And this is a picture taken, I believe, yesterday or the day before. We've just started planting, we're almost finished. And water coming down the street and being guided into the green area, and that the water that's not been infiltrated can go into this big pipe, or the big concrete circle in the bottom, and we will guide it to the retention area. But this is more for rainwater, because if seawater coming in, there's too much water for this option, and then it will just go on the street to the retention area. What we also do is not only look at a kind of short-term solution, but really look at long-term strategies, and look at long-term ways of dealing with sea level rise and coastal change, and how to combine that with development in the area. And we basically say you have to look at all different aspects like ecology, economy, livability, climate, safety, and culture. So not just look at the safety area, have the focus on safety, but look at a broader spectrum of things. One of the things we do in Vlissingen, maybe you've seen the booklets on the table as well. We have a way of dealing with or making developments possible, knowing that eventually we would have to rise the dike, and we have a way of dealing with it by building in a very unique way, and you can find it in the building, just read it. And I don't have enough time to explain everything. I could do the full 10 minutes about this. We've also done some public engagement. We've done an international show on the boulevard, exhibition, which really had a very big impact. It was both in Dutch and English, and it drew a lot of people there. We've also had some internal meetings with experts about history, archaeology, and the technical design. And on the bottom right, you see where right in the pilot area, we did some participation with the people that lived in the area about what they wanted within the design. The lessons learned is that you need to take the approach on flood risk management, and you need to deal with broader challenges such as pressure from tourists, loss of biodiversity, and extreme precipitation, and combine the funding for it. So that is a way to get more funding than you would otherwise have. The other thing is that we really liked working together with enthusiastic experts in addition to our own experience that really helped us getting on with this and doing this, creating this new idea. and get started with breakthrough solutions when they are not threatening. So when everybody still has time to think about all the consequences and look into all the possibilities, then there's enough time to look at breakthrough solutions. When you really have to do something now to prevent disaster, then it's probably too late to do so. That's about it.
Thanks, Mariah. So as I said before, if you have any questions, if you just use the Mentimeter, we've already had 3 questions come in, but we'll address them later. So maybe just quickly show it so people can see the login. That's right there at the top, so make note of that. Okay, so if we come back to the presentations, our next pilot manager to talk is going to be from the Environment Agency. That's going to be Harriet, wherever she is. She's coming. She's going to tell us a little bit more about the pilot down in Newlyn and about the challenges and the lessons learned that they've had there. So over to you, Harriet.
I'm going to try and stuff this in some. Yes, hello, my name is Harriet Goode and I work for the Environment Agency down in Devon and Cornwall. And there's a team of us that work on the Newlyn pilot, some are with us today, hopefully some are online too. And that consists of members from the Environment Agency, from Atkins and from Kia. Ooh. Brilliant, thank you. So, intro to the pilot. So, Newlyn is a small fishing village down by Penzance in the deep dark depths of Cornwall. The flood risk itself is the waves run up the existing harbour arm and overtop at Tolkien Bridge. And we've got some videos later to see how much water actually does overtop there. There is an existing breakwater in the area where it helps to break up this wave energy. It's a very kind of high energy wave environment, and you get a lot of kind of crashing of waves over the top. And so we're looking to kind of do improvements. However, when we look to kind of improvements and kind of actually increasing the crest level, increasing the length of the existing scheme, we had a funding gap of 4.4 million, so just a little bit of pocket money. And so we're looking at eco-engineering products to not only deliver kind of multi-benefit ecosystem improvements, but also potentially being a kind of a more cost-effective way forward. The reason also it's offshore, as you can see in the top photo over there. We've got properties that kind of line the coast, so it's a hold the line policy. We're not expecting to be moving these properties anytime soon. So offshore kind of protection is really the only way forward. So it's a research and development project, and the main objectives of the research and development project are kind of to, first of all, can these blocks survive in this high energy climate? Will they still be in one piece in a good amount of kind of lifetime? Will it be able to support this growth of marine plants and kind of habitat for like marine life? And if the growth on these units provide a kind of bioarmouring effect, so does the growth protect these units long enough to actually lengthen their lifetime, their time frame, and maybe a little bit again, which we mentioned earlier about carbon sequestration on this type of engineering, which is great. Boring slide here, but just to say about national strategy and policies. So there is just a general kind of move towards adaptation, towards working with natural processes, and so there's a lot more national drivers now to make this a lot more mainstream. So, yeah, fun stuff. We've got a couple of videos here of the flood risk that is in Newlyn, and these are like 2014 storms, which have kind of affected a lot of the coastline, but you can see how big the volumes of water. So this is looking down at the breakwater, which is in the distance. You can kind of see the crest. So even when the water is not reaching the top of the breakwater, it is still allowing this amount of overtopping, which, yeah, is quite scary if you're there. here. So just a little bit of water. Yeah, so the flood risk here is very apparent. It is happening now, and we need to look at interventions where we can. So yeah. Cool. So what are we actually doing? No, not what we're actually doing. In November 2020, Exo Engineering very kindly donated a bunch of blocks. So a couple of eco units, but on a very small scale. And the idea was to test a bunch of different surface textures. So you can see in the photo here, we've got lots of different types, and they were monitored on a quarterly basis to see which surface texturing was the most effective in this location. And that came out with the honeycomb one, and you can kind of see the succession that's happened over the monitoring. So we've been really impressed with the growth on these units and the kind of the species that we found. And I won't try and pronounce all of those or any of those, but for the ecologists in the room, there's some fun species that we found, which has been brilliant. So now that we know that stuff grows on this technology in this location, we are now looking at the next stage, which is the full pilot project. Exciting. So we are putting down 88 about 4.8 tonne block units from 4 different suppliers. We've got Arc Marine, E-Concrete, Exo Engineering, and JP Concrete. So the research is to try and find out, which type of surface texturing, which types of unit, all that kind of stuff works in this location, and we wanted to kind of maximise the learning. Hence, we used 4 different suppliers. These units not only have utilise surface texturing and voids, but also have things like a chemical makeup that has the pH that allows marine life to have some affinity to it. And they use kind of like low carbon concrete, all that fun stuff. And so we're plopping it in an apron around the existing breakwater and testing if these units actually work how we hope, which is to survive. So pre-construction elements, we did a bunch of public engagement, including a drop-in, a lot of schools engagement, and an art competition, which was nice and creative. But from that, we were able to kind of learn a little bit more about the heritage of the area, a couple of historic features that we needed to protect that we weren't aware of, so we had to change our kind of construction methodology, and also local business use. So our temporary site compound, we adjusted that to make that a lot more acceptable to the public. The permissions process, as I'm sure many people are aware, especially in the UK, permissions are quite obviously like a lengthy process. You've got planning permission and a marine licence, and a marine licence was made extra fun because obviously they don't have a statutory deadline. So you kind of put in your application, you hope it'll be around 3 months or so for it to turn around, and thankfully it did. But our team put in a really lot of work into kind of preparing the documents to go into planning applications, and it meant that we had no pre-commencement conditions. So that was so valuable to be able to kind of make sure that we had everything in place beforehand. Obviously, with the fact that it is an innovative product going in a new kind of, they're normally used in subtidal locations. So plopping it into a kind of intertidal high wave energy kind of climate. There is some design liability, which as the client, EA, we had to kind of sign that off at every kind of moment. So it made the process a lot longer because we had to make sure everything was in place before we moved to the next one, because we couldn't move forward with any risk. So yeah, that was extra fun. And then because it's in an intertidal zone, obviously, before we went on site, we did our contractors did some analysis on tide times and levels, because actually the working window is very small. It's only about 3 hours, and and we have weeks where we're not actually constructing at all because of the tides. So construction, so we're ongoing. We're on site at the moment, which is brilliant. We are making sure there's an even distribution of these units, so all the different suppliers are at the same kind of aspects, the same levels, so that we can have comparable results for the different kind of units that we have. One of the things that we found is that although suppliers generally use eyelets to be able to kind of place these units on it, they all use slightly different systems, and so our contractors have to be a lot more flexible to be able to kind of do the placement yeah, make sure that it works fine. And obviously we are constructing in the winter, which makes it super fun for, you know, being on, like, ready for coastal storms, or, you know, we're always kind of checking the weather conditions and kind of the coastal conditions to make sure that it's safe to do that work. So yeah, another fun challenge. Also, we're tracking over some kind of rocky shore areas. So there was kind of some process in the selection of the plant material that we're using down there. And we also, where they track each day, the contractors do a really good job of, like, moving marine life, so like limpets and snails and all that kind of stuff. They move them out of the way so that hopefully we don't disturb any marine life, which is great. And we've also, so you can kind of see where we track from. So this is our site compound at the top. This is where we track on the foreshore to the breakwater. And then it crosses the southwest coast path as well, which is quite a popular pedestrian route. So Kia did a really good job of doing kind of like a public diversion route so that people could always walk past, and it was kind of a health and safety brilliant, like, move, because it meant there was no pressure to move off that that area. So what's next? Obviously, like we said, there's some design liability stuff, you know, this is a research project. It's not widely done as breakwater, like an intertidal breakwater, high energy kind of location. So we're now looking at how can we use this evidence and feed this evidence into kind of mainstreaming this technology and allowing it to be able to be used in optioneering in future projects, and allowing it to be designed more easily into kind of more projects like this. So we've got a 5-year monitoring schedule for all things green and plants and all that fun stuff. And as well as we're doing, like, level surveys over the years and kind of asset inspections to make sure it's delivering that breakwater function similar to rock. I will stop there because I keep getting waved the card. So yeah, cool. Brilliant.
Thanks, Harriet. That was really interesting, and we've had some more questions coming on the Mentimeter. If you want to ask online, feel free to use that as well, or just comment in the section below. So we're going to crack on with the city of Blankenberge. We'll have Alain presenting for us. Over to you, Alain.
So good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to just give you some information of Blankenberge itself. We are a small coastal town in Belgium, in between Brugge and Zeebrugge. We have about 22,000 inhabitants. We are very small. We have a surface of around 17 square kilometers. It's a very compact city, as you see on the aerial photo there. And the project location, the site location, is in the eastern part of our town. This is a more detailed picture of the site location, where you see that it is actually existing of a road segment divided into two concrete, let's say, streets, one for inbound traffic, one for outbound traffic. So those are the two road segments. In between, the green part is where the coastal tram is having its track. That coastal tram that runs from De Panne in the west to Knokke in the east. Now the project itself is about breaking up this part of the road segment, so the one adjacent to the dunes. It is about 12 meters wide, and it consists of a sidewalk, a cycling path, parking lane for cars, then the road segment, and then another parking lane for cars. So the idea was to break up that road and to give it back to nature, with the exception of a cycling path of around 4 meters wide that would be kept in place. And we would like to create, by doing all that, a kind of dune behind dune situation, so new dunes, young dunes next to the already existing dunes. This is not part of the project, but it's interesting to mention. The red stars are two stops, present stops of the local coastal tram. They will be removed and they will be replaced by one stop at the beginning of the pilot site where you see the blue star. Now, this is a detailed picture of what the site location looked like before SARCC, so a couple of months ago, because we've recently started with the works. And this is what it looked like in September. So here you can see that the road has been broken up already. A couple of weeks later, the cycling path was put in place. And then very recently, this is where the sand has been put in place. And very recently, we have started with planting the marram grasses. And now, as we speak today, the project is nearly finalized, nearly finished. Now, about the challenges that we had to cope with. As you saw, we had two parking lanes at in the road segment that was or that is going to be broken up. That is actually been broken up already. So we lose approximately 114 parking spaces, which is always well, not a nice message to give to the public as a decision maker. You also saw that before SARCC, that part of Blankenberge allowed traffic to drive into town and also out of town. So we only have one road segment left, so which meant that we had to take a decision about the direction of traffic that was going to be left. Also, the cycle path and the hardening of the cycle path was a challenge that we had to cope with. The general public wanted it to be as ecological as possible, a soft material, but there were also other actors that pointed out to us that it needed to be hard because of a number of reasons. And then, one of the things that we might have to cope with in the future is sand that can end up on the cycle path when there is wind. And then, the dune plantings was another issue that we had to cope with. Now, as I mentioned, we lose approximately 114 parking spaces, and also a part of the road that is going to be broken up was used for lorries and for trucks to park there, especially in the weekends. Now, the red rectangle is the site location again. The blue line there is where the trucks and lorries were parked before SARCC. Now we found, where you see the circles, we found some, in town, we found some areas where we could draw some lines to create new parking facilities, parking places. And at the east side of our town, there is a bigger area that in the future will also be organized for parking. The second blue line, the one most at the right side of the picture, is where the trucks can park now. So we did find some solutions for that parking issue. Also, this is how the new parking spaces in the road segment that is left are organized. So not parallel with the road anymore, but diagonally, so that we have more places for cars than when it should be one line. So when we had some arguments to convince the people that the loss of parking spaces was not going to be a very big issue. Also not because that parking was mainly used in summer, in high season, a couple of days in the year actually only. The people that live next to the project site and the apartment blocks, you can see some pictures there. They have their own private parking garages. So for them, it was less an issue that those parking spaces would disappear. Another issue was the traffic direction that would remain. So before, as I mentioned, we had inbound and outbound traffic in the project site area. Now that there is only one road left, we had to decide whether we would let people drive into town in that part of the city or out of town. We had talks with businesses on the boulevard mainly and in the neighborhood of the project site, and also with people that live there. And we had to take into account all the advantages and disadvantages. And we then decided to have to allow traffic to drive into town in that part of our project site, because it was closer to the boulevard. If not, heavy traffic and people would have to take this road, and then drive through town to reach most of the businesses or the boulevard, sometimes heavy loaded trucks. So that was another issue we had to tackle. But also there we think we found the right solution. The cycle path surface, as I mentioned before, the general public preferred a more ecological kind of material, like in the dunes. It's some shells or wood. But because the part of the cycle path that is still in place also needs to be used when something happens as an evacuation route, or also can be used or might be used by fire trucks or other heavy trucks. It needed to be still a hard material. So that was actually one of the main reasons why we chose for that solution. And then a few minor issues maybe, the choice of dune plantings. Because of the specific location, there was not that much choice. We needed, or we had chosen marram grasses. We did want to avoid that exotic plants would mingle with the marram grasses. In the recent past, the Flemish government has removed a lot of invasive species in the dunes. Because they are not in their place there. So we need to take measures, if possible, to prevent those invasive species to come back. The removal was a very expensive issue. And then, yes, that were the challenges. How could we convince the public that this nature-based solution and that this climate change measure could benefit? First of all, we mentioned the benefits for climate. So removing the concrete is also preventing or lessen the heat stress. Removing the concrete allows the water to seep into the soil, which is of course also a benefit for climate. The fact that there is only one direction left for traffic means that it gets safer. It's calmer, less traffic is less noise. And then, of course, for the people that live around it and for the people that want to cycle there or walk there, a nature environment is obviously much nicer than a concrete road. And in general, we could say that that pilot project will also increase the quality of life for the people living around it. Well, that was in a nutshell the Blankenberge pilot. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So we're going to move straight on to Ostend. So whoever is presenting from Ostend, Karel. So tell us about the lessons learned over there. Over to you.
Thank you. Just looking here. So that way. Just a few words on the pilot in Ostend. The conditions we were working on there. First issue was, will we still have hard measures to protect the coast. In the past, this was the way of dealing with it. So in the late, let's say, 2010, 2012, we began thinking about the coastal protection for the city of Ostend. And at that time, hard measures were a kind of the standard. But evolving the project, we came to new insights, also working with the SARCC project. And we began thinking together with the Flemish government if there was a possibility of working with soft measures. And in the project area, soft measures as sand nourishment were one of the most interesting issues to protect the coast. But with these soft measures, the coastal protection was at the level we should have. But on the other hand, by the sand nourishment, the hard measures in combination with the sand nourishment led to that kind of constellations when we had stormy conditions. So the coastal protection was okay, but the use of the road, of the tramway, of the walking path on the dike was not in a condition, and we had a lot of costs to remove the sand and so on and so on. So at that point, as a local authority, we had to think about how can we make a kind of win-win between those soft measures of sand nourishment and avoid these conditions that we have to close the road every time we have stormy conditions. And then we were thinking about, can we create a kind of new dune landscape at the site so that the sand of the sand nourishment can be kept in place at the location itself to avoid that sand is blowing on the road, on the tramway, and so on. And we can avoid the cost of cleaning up situations every 14 days during winter periods. And we had to experiment with it because we are not used to work in that kind of conditions. And that's together with the Flemish government and some universities, we were looking at how can we create conditions that we can keep the sand in place and different planting patterns and ways of fences, wooden fences with planting and so on were put in place and monitored just to learn how can we deal with conditions to keep the sand in place and what will be then the evolution of that kind of plantations and dunes. And here we see the project area about 700 meters, and in the year since it has been planted, we have seen that we can really keep the sand in place, and the monitoring together with the Flemish government there is very important. And in this monitoring process, Daphne here is also from the Flemish government. She can talk about it if there are questions about. Monitoring will still be in place for the coming years. Every month, every 2 months, there are drone flights, and there we try to see how sand levels and so on are evolving. And we also, from the city side, local authority side, a lot of people are taking a look at the street when we have heavy wind conditions. So also on Facebook and so on, people say at the location of the project, we don't see any sand anymore on the tramway or on the road. And in the other parts where we didn't have these plantations, there is still a kind of sand problem on the road. So what we learned from the project, that's the dunes were growing very fast. So this was very amazing. But on the other hand, if the marron grass is really covered with sand, it don't grow anymore. So in the coming months, we will have to do some new plantation actions to just let the dunes grow gradually in the future. So it's quite interesting to see that the landscape is changing, and communicating this with the people is also a challenge. And what I learned yesterday also is if we have a kind of landscape approach, that also storytelling about that kind of projects is very important. So not just saying we try to protect the coast, but we also try to create a new landscape, a new attitude towards the coast from local people, also from the tourists that are passing by there. So that's one of the important lessons. And as we are thinking about, together with the Flemish government, to coastal protection, to if sea level rise 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters towards 2100, also these lessons can be put in this global approach. And also there we see that the system now is in a rather not built area where we are trying to monitor this thing, but in the future, perhaps also in built areas, this can be an approach that once people are adapted to that kind of changing the coastline, if we can put it into a kind of nice story, perhaps also on built areas, this can be one of the solutions we can promote. So the importance of this close monitoring in the future, in the coming years, will be very important just to promote that kind of solutions. So this was my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Karel. So we're going to go over to the last pilot in Belgium, so that's Middelkerke. So I'll hand over to our pilot manager there. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Steen. I'm a technical director of the city of Middelkerke. And we also did a pilot on Nature Based Solutions. This is a photo of how it looks today. I first will do a little visualization of the project, then I will talk about the design and the participation phase, and then what we have learned for the long term. This is the complete project of what we are doing in West End. In SARCC, it was only the left side who was put in for the SARCC project, but we were planning to create a complete new dune in Middelkerke. At first, we had a gray structure. This, when we first started to design, it was only a wave-stilling basin, which you can see in the middle, this part. That was foreseen for the whole project, 1.4 kilometers gray infrastructure. But then came the product of SARCC, and they told us about nature-based solutions, and we looked into it, and it looked very interesting for us. So then we designed two dune for dikes, one on the left side and one on the right side. Why we did that? That's because of the amount of people who were on the beaches. We did some surveys in the summer and counted how many people are on the beaches, how many area do we have, and what is the critical area one person needs to be comfortable on the beach when they stay there. And that's how we decided where we will put some nature-based solutions, because that takes a lot of place, and where we still do the gray solution, the wave-stilling basin. Of the total project of 1.5 kilometers, 60% is nature-based solutions, and only 40% is gray infrastructure. Then we went to the public. What did we tell them? Not only we will make Middelkerke safer when 1 in 1,000-year storm comes, but we went with a project of more experience, more nature, more sun, and also more protection. But the last item for the public was not the most important one. But they needed a very beautiful project. It have to look good, and even if there is buildings beside it, for them it's also a good solution. We did a lot of public markets. We put some little places where we construct what we will do. We listened to the public. We adapted our design. That's also very important. You can go to the public, but you have to be convinced that if they say something and it makes sense, then you have to adapt your project. Otherwise, you won't have them involved with the project. And we started with a bottom-up approach. We listened to them. They came with ideas. We adapted. We went back. Oh, that's good, but this is still a little thing to address. And so they came ambassadors of our project. At the end, if there was something negative about it on Facebook or the other social media, other people of the city reacted to it. No, it's not true. It's a good project, and that's what you need to make your project work. And after 2 years of consulting the public, then we only started to put in our building permit and start constructing. During the building permit, there was not one objection. Nobody disagreed with the project, so that's very good for such a big project. We talked about it yesterday. What is the cost? What is the benefit of this project? Okay, the infrastructure is cheaper. So 1 meter of nature-based solutions cost only 1/7 of the grey infrastructure. So for the city of Melkerke, it's cheaper to build with nature-based solutions, but also for the people who lived next to it. The real estate, there is a global barometer of the councils of Belgium who look at the prices of a modest apartment. And you can see in Flanders in 2022, the increase was 7.5%, and in West End, it was 18.5%. But even on the shoreline, on the dike, the average in Flanders increase is 13.6%, but there in West End, it was already 49.2%. That's 5 times more than the average in Flanders, and the work was still in progress. It was one big construction site, but even then people say, oh, it will be good, we will invest in West End. So that's also one of the things we now can go to the public and say, it's also good for you. There is one restaurant who was in the Nature-Based Solutions site, and at first he was a little bit negative because he thought his terrace won't work as good as anymore. But now we see his venue as he did 5 times more profit than the years before. His terrace was the best terrace on the total coast of West End. So that are things you have to say to the people. It's working, and it's not only bad, instead it's good. What have we learned during the project? It's not easy. It's not easy to convince the public, but you can do that if you listen very good to them. But it's also not easy with all the different procedures. For instance, the Flemish government, who is concerning the preservation of nature, is very difficult to work with, because changing beach to dune, that's not that easy for them, because there's 2 different types of environment, and you can't change one type into another one. Also controlling the dune, we said to the people, okay, we'll make sure the eyesight of the sea will always be in place. But that was not that easy to have the permit to do that from the Flemish government. After long discussion, we get it, but that's not easy. So if we want to make nature-based solutions work and convince the people, we have to make sure all those procedures are easier and better adapt to what we want to do. Also, the form of a dune for dike is very important. Most of the dunes were designed with specialists from the Netherlands. There was one part who wasn't initially in the project. We did it ourselves, but not that good, and that's the only place we have still some sand problems on the dike, because the slope wasn't the right size and that. But in general, we learned it will work, and we decided to do phase 3 of the project, also with nature-based solutions. And a week or 3 ago, our government decided to start in Melkerke with the same nature-based solutions. So that's one thing we learned. It's something that will work where there is place, because that's one of the negative things. It takes a lot of place of your beach to build a nature-based solution.
Thank you, Stein. That was really fascinating and really nice to see the link of value coming back to the local properties. I think that's been mentioned yesterday and also earlier today by Amy. So it's definitely great to see that working. I'll just quickly switch over to the Mentimeter just to remind everyone that that is how you can put forward questions. I see we've got loads already, which is fantastic. Not sure we're going to have time to actually go through all of them, but so we're just going to quickly go back to the final presentation before we go to the panel. So we will have Joe Matthews from Southend Borough Council tell us a little bit about the pilot, maybe challenges and some of the learnings that you had to overcome. And obviously we will be going to see the pilot site later on, or everyone who's here. I will tell you a little bit more about that. But for now, over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Jo Matthews. I'm the Principal Engineer within the Civil Engineering team at Southend-on-Sea City Council. Within our team, we have the remit for flood and coastal erosion management, as well as that of the lead local flood authority, and we also carry out lots of design work to our public highways and open spaces. So, as you're going on a bus tour with one of my senior engineers, Andrew, after lunch, I'm not going to talk too much about what we've done, because I don't want to steal his thunder, as he's going to be doing a little running commentary for you. So, if I can get this to work. Sorry, technology hates me, I should have warned you. So what we've got here is just a summary slide, basically. So about 18 months ago, John Bennett knocked on my door and said, Joe, can you deliver some of these measures for us? So working together with John, we had a look at our strategy for Southend. We have a coastal strategy, which is our kind of key document. And we had a look at some of the sites that possibly we could implement nature-based solutions along the coastline. Now, for those of you who know Southend, you'll know it's very tight, it's very urbanised, and there are areas where we have to defend, but there's always room for nature. So this is what we have been doing over the past few months. There's several places we've looked at. You're going to go to Two Tree Island this afternoon. You're going to go and look at the green sea wall, which is the one up the top there in the corner. I won't talk more about that now, because obviously Andrew is going to explain that to you in a little bit more detail. We've also installed vertipools in the Leaport area. That's been really good. We've got some bugs and beasties in there, so it'd be great to have a chat to Bournemouth University about your findings and our findings. That'd be fantastic. We're also looking at doing some dune regeneration works as well up at the Shoebury end, which again we will be starting in the new year. And I'll explain why in a minute. We've also got the vegetative shingle scheme, which is this area up here. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. And then our last project is the climate resilient garden. So that's kind of going back to how can we incorporate nature into our hard engineering defences? What can we do for the community? How can we get them involved? How can we get them to use it? So rather than just having plants, let's make it a kind of nice space for the public to use as well. So, right. So I'm going to talk mostly about the challenges as part of this project. As I say, Andrew will talk about more of the projects in detail when you're on the bus. So one man's meat is another man's poison. So one of the biggest learning things from this project and various other projects we're working with on the coast and in the flooding world is that it doesn't matter if you think it's the best thing since sliced bread. There is always people out there who do not like what you're doing. And people will always say, as long as you can make people understand what you're doing, they'll be on board with that. No, they won't. So it doesn't matter if your scheme isn't threatening. It doesn't matter if you've got red data book species and all these wonderful bugs and beasties and flora in an area. What we've found is to get people to come on board with some of the schemes that John mentioned yesterday, the vegetative shingle. That really is Marmite. People love it, or they just think it's scrubby grass. So it's about giving that kind of hydro-citizenship approach to a project. And that's something I'll talk about more tomorrow when I talk about Catchment to Coast, which is one of the national FCRIP projects. But hydro-citizenship in the community is really key with all of our projects along the coast and also in the flooding world. So whilst John said it's lovely, you know, everyone's really accepting of it now, they're accepting of it, but they don't like it. And I can back that up with the emails I get in my inbox quite regularly from people asking me to get rid of the scrubby mess on the foreshore. It's worked out quite well. We're quite lucky because the bugs and the beasties and the plants like the shingly bits, which is the kind of the habitat that we're trying to protect and encourage, and humans kind of like the sandy soft bits. So whilst there is conflict, you can actually engineer, sorry, having to use that word, I am an engineer, and you know, we're not the enemy. We can work with everybody to accomplish some of these things. So, you know, you can find a pathway that people will accept, but it's very much about bringing people along on that journey with you. Next thing we learnt. So, nature-based solutions, plants. We have this lovely program of works. Plants don't grow to a timetable. Initially, we thought we could buy in plants, native plants, and we could use those in our nature-based solutions. A big learning point there was knowing your market. There's not a great many suppliers out there of native coastal plants. So as we have an amazing parks team, when we have a great nursery set up, we decided we would grow and propagate our own plants. So we've been scampering around, picking up seeds from the seashore, propagating those and growing those on. Unfortunately, the plants haven't grown as quickly as we wanted them to. So again, we will be doing some more planting in the springtime, and hopefully they are sufficient size to go out. Just stepping right back to the beginning, as I said, I was quite late to the SARCC party. I wasn't really involved in any of the preparation side of it, the bid side of things. We've had some major modification changes, and it's basically because the science and the engineering were not correct. So it's really important with these schemes to make sure you get your baseline data correct and you have the right people involved at the right time so you can avoid major modifications later. These are things that can be foreseen. I'm not talking about things that can't, like engineering difficulties. Very much for the UK. I mean, people have spoke about it before, Amy and others. We need a lot of time in the UK to get through the consents and the licenses and the permissions that are required to do works. So I won't dwell on that anymore because we are obviously all aware of that. And a last learning point as well is beware the Interreg bubble. This isn't the first Interreg project I've been involved in. I've been involved in Sail, Maya, Sponge, Sunrise, various different projects. And I think as the project's absolutely fantastic at sharing the information amongst ourselves, maybe not so much with the kind of regional people and the local groups in the area. From personal experience, when I've mentioned SARCC at coastal meetings and flood meetings, you know, around the East Anglia coast, people didn't know about it. So I've been out there banging the drum and explaining. And I think it goes back to that other point we spoke about earlier about we're all doing this work. We've all got this information. How are we going to share it? Where is it going to be stored? And how are people going to access it? So those are really the key learning points from the Southend pilot. And as I say, Andrew will fill you in a lot more on the projects when you go on your bus tour after lunch.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. So can I invite all of our pilot managers or whoever is representing each pilot city onto a panel, and we're just going to run through a few questions before lunch. Whilst you all come, I will just go back to the Mentimeter. We will have an option to also take questions from within the room. Yeah, please. Sorry, it is a little bit tight, but there we go. Hopefully everyone can squeeze in. And if you can share those two microphones between you, please, so everyone online can hear you as well, please. So that was a series of fascinating quick presentations about our pilots, and there is a lot of variability between the different nature-based solutions that are being applied, and I think we have seen that the challenges perhaps are quite common across a lot of them, where the local public or local businesses are very protective over what they know, what they have. I think Alan's point about the parking spaces is very easy, because I'm sure all of us know the frustration of coming to a coastal town for a holiday and not being able to park anywhere. So that is a big issue. I will perhaps just start with the first few questions right at the beginning for Vlissingen. If we have, yes, sorry, Jeffrey is there. I was looking for for your colleague, but there we go. So Your solution is within the city. Someone's wondering if there are any possible solutions on the seaside or outside the city boundaries. It is on.
It's working, yeah? Yeah. Well, my name is Jeffrey Beenhouwer. I'm the project manager for the municipality of Vlissingen, and Mariah asked me if I do this part of the seminar. Are there solutions outside the urban area? Yes, there are. I think within the SARCC project we saw some very interesting projects like Nieuwlin, like Middelkerke. But it's maybe good to explain something about the responsibles in the coastal zone for the Netherlands. On a national level, we have Rijkswaterstaat. They are responsible for the waterways and the sea. And then on regional level, we have the Regional Water Board. They are responsible for the coastal safety mainly and the beaches. And then we have the municipalities, and they are responsible for spatial development. So as a municipality, we don't have direct responsibilities in coastal safety, but we have ambitions in the coastal zone. And that's why we try to develop new ways of thinking of how you can integrate spatial development with the objectives for coastal development, coastal safety. So there are opportunities, but it's not for us as municipality to be the leading partner in these solutions.
Okay. By the way, if anyone has any things to add in the question, just wave at me frantically and I'll try to notice. So perhaps just one quick add-on question to that for you, Jeffrey. You mentioned, or Mariah mentioned in the presentation, that eventually the seawalls might have to be raised. And that is something that's going to react to climate-induced sea level rise. But currently you're trying to not do that, not invest that money at the moment, and allow the extreme storm events to kind of go over the existing defenses. Is there a lot of nervosity, or are people kind of scared of the idea of living, on a street that maybe every 10 years there will be a huge amount of storm water running through? I mean, we've seen the videos from Nieuwlin, and it is pretty scary when that amount of water does go past.
Yeah, well, in Nieuwlin it's quite scary. And we were discussing before we started the pilot, how would the public react to this idea? But they are very positive about the way we are thinking about climate change and how we can integrate it in spatial planning and urban public areas. And they say, well, the effect of raising the dike with a meter or 2 meters or 3 meters at any moment is so much higher for the quality of living in an urban area than when we see when there's a storm once in every 10 years or 20 years and there's flooding within the street. The impact of flooding once in 20 years is much lower than the impact of, demolish many things and qualities within your urban area.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Jeffrey in the room? No? Okay, I'll crack on. Maybe I'll move on to Nieuwlin then. So you talked about the level of problem of flooding, and we've all seen the videos. How are the inhabitants, because you've done a lot of engagement, how are they reacting to the relatively small action, as someone mentioned here, in relation to the impact of the storm flooding? Do they see it as actually, something that will change the entire problem, or is it just a baby step from the perspective of the public?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is on.
That is on.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we've had to quite clearly communicate that it is a step. With a research and development project, we have to be very clear that we're not delivering any sort of protection for flood risk. Hopefully, obviously, those like the 88 blocks will do some wave attenuation and we'll be able to help a little bit. But at the moment, we're proving to see if that actually works or not. So we have no guarantee. But with it being, when we looked at doing a kind of a rock breakwater improvement, the cheapest option was rock from Norway. So the carbon footprint is obviously excruciating. And the units that we've got now are all fabricated in Cornwall using local aggregate, and they're all ultra low carbon. So that is a great carbon saving, and we're definitely getting a lot more kind of funding sources that are starting to open up for the low carbon kind of projects. So this kind of gives us a stepping stone to not only look at ways of delivering eco-engineering, but actually delivering this breakwater for this community. So if we can prove that that this kind of unit works in this location, then and Newlyn is the ultimate test, as you saw in those videos. Those waves are pretty damn huge. Yeah, it's a way of being able to use maybe a more economic and affordable way of providing that breakwater for the community.
Okay, so do you see it as a little bit of a stepping stone towards a wider strategy? So perhaps something similar to what we saw in Middelkerke, where the initial pilot was fairly small, but now it is being expanded across a much wider part of the coastline.
Yeah, 100%. As I said before, with the design liability aspect, we ourselves have had to take on a little bit extra liability and kind of risk factor for the performance of the project, which normally, consultants would be very happy to design in kind of things that are tried and tested. So Newlyn was seen as a slightly more low risk location because it's already got an existing breakwater that we can kind of put units around instead of having them stand alone. But the idea would be to be able to use these as an optioneering for projects all around the Devon and Cornwall coast and hopefully further in the future.
Okay, we have a couple questions at the back of the room. So Isaac, if you can take the microphone to them.
Hi, is this working? I had a question for Newlyn about the different suppliers and the companies and how they're working with you. Are they taking the results back? Is there going to be some sensitivity here if their particular design isn't found to be great? We work with 4 brilliant companies. We're really excited to be working with all of them, and they all bring something different with things like different sizes of aggregate and different kind of surface texturing, different kind of water retention features that they all kind of bring to the table. And we have chatted with them and agreed with them the kind of things that we can take as learning. And obviously, they're private companies, so we don't want to be stealing any kind of things that they've been working and spending a lot of money on at that point. So we've kind of, we know what we've agreed to a kind of a joint learning, and I also know that the kind of suppliers have their own monitoring schedules on top of our own. We're looking at ways to share that data more widely, and we're now obviously at this conference, but we're trying to get the message out there about the kind of the data, and over the next 5 years we'll be sharing that. But no, the suppliers have been absolutely brilliant at working together. They're kind of very understanding that we want to kind of get the most learning, and I think they're all signed up to the wider picture rather than their individual profits. They're actually they want to do a good thing, and that's why they do it. They're actually really passionate about the environment, which is brilliant. We had suppliers offering their own fabrication yards for the other suppliers, kind of thing. So it was actually really amicable working, and it's all kind of signed up to that one outcome, which is great.
We have one more question in the back.
So low carbon concrete is still concrete. Is there a reason, or were any other materials explored for the blocks? And if they were and they were dismissed, why were they dismissed?
The units themselves are kind of, with the time frame of the project, they're kind of off-the-shelf kind of products. So I believe they're categorised as ultra-low carbon concrete, which because I add an extra twist, but I think because there's British standards in engineering for low carbon concrete, but there isn't for ultra-low. It is still overall, to kind of using granite rock from all these locations, it is a carbon saving, which surprises people about the kind of the concrete elements, but yeah, generally it is a carbon saving for this type of project, which is brilliant. And I think, some of the other colleagues were saying about, is that they're making such great advancements in recycling kind of aggregates and all that kind of stuff. We have a quarry that we work with and that some of our suppliers have used. Castle and Dynus, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly to anyone from Cornwall in the room. We regulate them as a regulator, as the Environment Agency, because this aggregate pollutes rivers, and
And actually it is kind of like a byproduct material, and we're able to kind of use a circular economy effect of being able to use that aggregate in these blocks to be able to then close that system so that actually the pollution is reduced, and actually it's providing that biodiversity aspect. So yeah, concrete, people look at it and they go, oh dear, concrete again, and yeah, they kind of how unnatural compared to the rock granite, but actually the rock granite is as grey as it ever was, and it was put in 1992, and those trial units greened up in about 6 months. So we're expecting the larger units to green up a lot slower, especially obviously the ones on the higher levels, but we are hopeful that they will just become almost like an apron of algae and seaweeds and all that kind of stuff, so it will look very natural in the long term. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. So that actually brings me to one of the other questions. Someone has asked about invasive species and how reproducible these pilots are along the whole coastline, where the invasive species are a big issue. So perhaps I can ask Alan first to comment on that, because you mentioned that you were really trying to stop those other plants encroaching on your dune.
Yes, well, that's an issue indeed, the invasive species. And, as I said, the Flemish government is removing those in the dunes, and that's a big financial issue. It costs a lot of money. What the pilots will mean for reducing those invasive species, I don't know. I'm not really an expert on that. I'm not sure if somebody of the colleagues can comment on that, but maybe
yeah.
Stijn.
Yes, Stijn.
For us, that was also an issue, but we made a design book or a maintenance book for the city council workers, and they observe what is growing in the new dune, and they have a list of what they have to let keep growing and what they have to remove before it can become greater and become an issue. So that's one of the things we addressed during the engineering phase.
Anyone else?
So it's going to be actually a monitoring thing and see indeed if those species come back or not. That's going to be the most important thing for us to deal with.
I think perhaps one thing to mention is that on the pilot projects we're trying to imitate a natural environment which is supposed to be in that area. So you would think that native species would prefer that area in the first place. But as you say, it is an ongoing monitoring. So moving on from the invasive species, I think there's a question that's kind of relevant for all our pilot managers. So you've all been doing public engagement and trying to get people on board, and you had some negative stances on the projects. What was the process of trying to convince those people, and how did you engage with those people who were resisting to start off with, and have they actually all turned around? Or, I mean, I guess Joe mentioned that there's always going to be some naysayers, but has that kind of reduced, or is it just very much the same group of people always causing issues?
Well, for the Blankenberger situation, as Stijn mentioned, they didn't have any reaction during the building process. The wanting the permission for Blankenberger 2, we had some remarks which were very local, mainly problems of people themselves with parking things, but those could be solved with talking to the people, with explaining them things, with minor adaptations. So if you look at the process of getting the building permission, we could see that because there were not that many negative reactions, we think we did a good job with before, with convincing them, communicating, and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone else want to add anything to that? Harel?
Well, we tried to work with positive energy, so if you go further with the people who are convinced, and there you try to get a kind of movement towards the project, then yeah, you don't have to put too much energy into the negative reactions. So, and that's one of the traps, I think, in that kind of projects. We have tendency to convince the people who are quite negative, but there are a few, and then you put a lot of effort to convince them, but it's just loss of effort. You can't convince them. They are so convinced of themselves, so you better put your energy into the people who are working with you, and then you have a majority of the people who are just in favor of the project, and this minority is getting lesser and lesser. So try to put positive energy towards the communication instead of putting all your energy in trying to convince those 3 people who are very negative towards the project.
Okay. Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, I was just going to say, thinking back to when I first started doing coastal engineering, when I left uni and it was all shiny, my first manager said to me, don't ever underestimate the power of a dog walker. And that has always stayed in my head because they have the ability to delay things and halt things and have negative, and you know, people, some members of the public can have a negative opinion. But if you flip that on its head, which is what we're doing for catchment to coast and going back to the hydro citizenship, that power can be positive. So if you can get them involved and get them engaged in what you're doing and take ownership and explain to them about resilience, adaptation, all the good things as well, hopefully that's another way to kind of remove some of that negativity.
Sorry, it was just a final one about, obviously, when you go to communities and there is negativity or anything like that, it's one, because first of all they know the most about that coastline than anyone else, so you're there to learn from them, you're not there just to tell them you know, about your project or kind of enforce anything. And also if they come in and there is some disagreement or anything like that, it's because they're passionate about where they live and they want it to be the best place. So listen and try and take on board what they said. I think someone else earlier said, adapt your methodologies, adapt what you're doing, and take time to be able to actually really listen to what people have to say, because it's so vital and important. And and that passion sometimes probably comes across as other kind of ways, or anger or anything like that, but actually you've got to appreciate that because they challenge you and they make your project better, which is a good thing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any comments in the room? No. That actually brings me to an aspect that someone mentioned about the Vlissingen pilot. You have people living next to a street which you're going to be using to channel water. Is there a sort of an insurance policy for those inhabitants to make sure that if it does happen, perhaps regularly, and their actual property is the one that's being sort of sacrificed most of the time when there is an extreme storm event, is there support for those people who've agreed to that project to be literally on their doorstep?
No, not yet. And nobody mentioned it when we are discussing our pilot. But the main objective for our pilot is the properties and the people are safe. So within the public area, the flooding has been on a regulated way, so you don't have any problems within your building or for your population. But this is the question which raises with the experts, and that was with the other questions where we saw that the community is ready to think about another way for public areas or urban areas and how to deal with climate change. There were mainly questions from the experts who say, well, how do we do it with insurance? I did it always this way, why do I need it to do another way? And that's one of the main objectives for the next years, I guess, to build on the objectives from the SARCC partnership, to do it in a very broad way along the coastline.
Okay. So I have another question for Ostend, for Karel. So someone was asking if, because you tested different planting arrangements and methods, did you identify the best one already, or is that something that will come later? And another aspect to it is from the monitoring data from the drones. Someone's picked up on the fact there seems to be erosion in front of the planting, and then that sand is then being shifted onto the planted area. But is there any thoughts on how that's going to evolve over time, and is that going to actually change how this functions in the long term?
I should suggest that Daphne should answer that question because she is responsible for the monitoring on behalf of the Flemish government.
Okay,
Perhaps she can get a
if
microphone.
Isaac can get you down the front, Isaac. Just here. Yeah.
Well, that are very interesting questions. That's why we have done these monitoring. About plantation scheme, we have played around with the plantation scheme, but we don't have any clear results about the scheme itself. So we played around with clustering the plants and planting into a more regular pattern, but they have trapped both a lot of sand. So we think that the planting scheme doesn't have that much importance, but the density of the plants. So how many plants do you have per square meter? That will be important for capturing the sand. Mm-hmm. And then about the erosion, the erosion that was shown is situated on the dry beach and also on the intertidal beach. So the erosion from the dry beach is the area where sand is blown into the dune system. So we have measured the sand that was blown into the dune system, and we have seen that almost 100% of the sand that was blown away is trapped into the dunes. So it was very successful as a sand catching system. A small percentage of the erosion is also due to the normal settling of the beach. So it's also a nourished beach, and the first 1 or 2 years after nourishment, you see that the nourishment is settling and that a part of the intertidal beach is moved onto the shore face. Mm-hmm. So that's a typical behavior of nourished beach.
Okay, thank you. Any comments in the room? I think everyone's posted their questions online, so I'm waiting for me to read all of these things and pick the best ones. So I'll move on from, since obviously in Ostend you've been capturing sand very effectively, and that's a similar process that some of the other pilots are trying to also imitate to an extent, or at least it's expected that it will happen. Someone was asking for the Middelkerke study. At the moment, it's been set up so that people can still have the view from the promenade, so that it doesn't obstruct the businesses on the promenade. What is going to happen if those dunes do grow because they capture extra sand, and is there some sort of contingency for that?
Yeah, it's also in our maintenance plan, discussed with the Flemish government. If we can't see the sea for a length of 100 meters, then we are allowed to adapt the dune. And we have to excavate the first meter, put it aside, then we can lower the sand. And the meter we put aside, we have to put back. And they say it's called the seed box of the dune. Then the dune will grow naturally very fast again. So that's all in our maintenance plan, how we have to do it, when we can do it, and the way we have to do it.
So that actually brings me to a question about that, because in your presentation you mentioned the cost of the intervention of the dune before dike is much lower than just a grey infrastructure. But is this long-term management going to change that? Is there going to be a lot of costs associated with it?
We have to see that in time, but we don't think that will be an issue, because before the work we had a lot of maintenance on the dike because there was a lot of sand on the dike, and we had to use a lot of excavators, manually work to remove all that sand back to the beach. The dune is now 2 years in place, and we only have to clean the dike once a month, sometimes less. So there's a lot of saving of costs. but there is a little bit more work into the dune. But it's now 2 years, and we don't see the dune grow that much. It's the first 2 meters who are grown a little bit, but because of the shape of the dune, you can prevent the dune of growing very fast. And that's one thing we learned from the Dutch specialists. They say you have to make it quite steep in the beginning, so the sand is blown onto the front of it, and not in the dune. And then the amount of rising of the dune is not that big, and you can keep the cost of maintenance low.
Okay. So I think this actually comes back to, again, it's relevant to several of the pilots, but the day-to-day management of the beaches or the front of the promenade, including cleaning perhaps invasive species or getting rid of some excess sand. Someone is making the point that it can actually help sediment mobilization because of the impact of machinery on the sand, I suppose. Is that considered in the designs of the pilots, or do you expect that impact of kind of ongoing management is not going to make the situation worse effectively? That's perhaps a difficult question, but there we go.
I think one of the key issues is not to do it all in once. Mm-hmm. That's one thing we also learned, do a little bit with bit by bit, so it can regrow, and then you do another part, and then you can prevent a lot of big places where there's only sand. When there you have the sediment transport, but if you can manage it, put some fences to prevent sediment, I think it will be manageable.
Okay. So I've got, because we're coming to an end of the session, I've got 1 or 2 questions left. One is a general question for all the pilot managers. The SARCC project is coming to an end in a couple months. Some of the pilot projects are still in the implementation phase, and there's definitely years of monitoring to come. How is the kind of collection of results and learnings going to be disseminated in the future? Is there going to be an ongoing program for that engagement going past the SARCC project, and where can people find this information? So maybe Carol can start with that.
Well, we will keep on monitoring in the coming years together with the Flemish government, and the Flemish government will use the results to put them into Flemish policy. So as we are thinking about the Flemish coast as a whole for future storm protection and that kind of stuff, this monitoring will be very important. And the way it will, I think the monitoring for the project in Ostend is at the moment free to see on the website of the Flemish government. So this kind of data will be public also in the future.
Okay, Jeffrey?
For us, there is a monitoring plan, and we monitor with our urban and regional partners. And we are looking for a new Interreg project, so we can have the next step in designing the whole thing about coastal design, and looking to a different way, and hopefully the monitoring from all the partners, but also our own monitoring plan can be well, evolved to a next project.
Sure.
So for Southend, yes, I'm going to talk about it more tomorrow, but the actual pilots and the learning and the monitoring evaluation that comes out of SARCC will be used within the Catchment to Coast project. So I will speak about that tomorrow, and I will explain where you can get that information and monitoring going forwards. So it's not going to disappear.
Yeah, that's perfect. So join tomorrow as well, because you'll hear more about it. Harriet?
Yeah, for Newlyn, I think I've already said we've got a bit of a 5-year monitoring plan, minimum kind of expectation for things that grow and things that live on it, as well as asset condition and do they work for flood defence and like flood risk management. And we're also, before the end of the closure of the SARCC project, we're kind of working with our consultants to work about that design liability issues. What information do we need to collect? What the gaps are, so that we can help mainstream this innovation into the future.
For Blankenberge, the monitoring will be done by ourselves in the near future at least. So it will look into the whether or not we have to remove a lot of sand from the cycle path. That will be a very important issue. So that's something that we are going to monitor ourselves. And I think after the first winter, we'll have some information on that. And then the second one is whether or not we have problems with the invasive species. So also there we need some time to get the first results on that. And obviously if there is an opportunity for any project or any collaboration with an educational institution, we'll be happy to accommodate that.
For Blankenberge, the monitoring is also done by the Flemish government. They are also a partner in our project. So the main data is will there be found.
Fantastic. So I suppose this helps that on the Belgian coast, it's quite a small coast, and a lot of the cities or towns there are very similar in terms of the issues they're facing, in terms of the type of stakeholders they have to deal with. Someone was clearly impressed with the Middelkerke pilot, so they are asking Ostend and Blankenberge if they're planning to use the same solution in their locations.
Perhaps, as we are together with the Flemish government thinking about coastal protection towards 2100 with the different sea level rising systems, this is an inspiring thing that we can also use in our communication, and to look how can we deal with in the built area, how can we deal with coastal protection to the future. Even if the high water line will move towards the sea, and we can create a kind of dune system between the promenade and the future sea line. This is very inspiring, so this will help us to do the communication, and perhaps we'll have the same system in the future.
Brilliant. Alan?
Yeah, well, as for Blankenberge, as you mentioned, the coastal towns, they have similarities, but also a lot of differences. Blankenberge has a promenade which has a length of only 3 kilometers. As Steen mentioned earlier, to do such a project, you need to have the space, and that space is not available in Blankenberge as far as I see it. We have that beach is too much used. There is also a difference in level between the promenade and the beach itself, which is less in West End. So we would love to do something similar, but I don't think it's possible for now.
Excellent. Okay, I think we'll have to finish the panel discussion here because we are running out of time. But thank you to all of our pilot managers for their presentations and their answers. I will be sharing everyone's email addresses later, so if you have any follow-up questions or projects to collaborate on, then you will be able to get in touch. So thank you, everyone.